Hello and welcome. Welcome to the first episode of Reimagining Our World with me, Sovaida Maani. To those of you who have joined live, thank you so much for giving of your time on a Saturday, wherever you are in the world. And I hope that you will find this beneficial. So friends, life is a journey, right? It's a journey both individually and for us as a collective whole, as a humanity. And inevitably, there comes a time in all of our lives when we don't particularly like where we've ended up, nor do we like who we've become. We experience this as individuals in many aspects of our lives. Many of us get to a point where we have health problems. We wake up one morning and we have aches and pains in our joints, or we have digestive problems, or we have heart disease, or emphysema, or something even more serious. And we have to take stock and decide what happens next. It happens in our relationships as well. Again, we seem to wake up one morning and realize that our marriages aren't the marriages we had hoped for and thought we had, that our relationships with our children are not the relationships we really want, and that our relationships with our friends and our communities are not as fulfilling as we would like. The same happens with societies and communities. During this pandemic, we've all woken up to the fact that we don't like the way our systems of governance are functioning. We don't like the fact that not everybody has access to good healthcare or education or housing. In this country, in the United States, we're slowly waking up to the fact that there's been systemic racism in our country, embedded into the very infrastructure. So it's inevitable that this happens. It's part of life. But the question is, what do we do once we realize that we aren't where we want to be and we don't really like who we've become collectively as a world or individually? So essentially, there are 3 steps that need to be taken in such circumstances. The first is to accept where we are. Really stare where we are in the face, in the eye, not go into denial and say, all right, let me fully embrace and accept that this is where I've ended up, or where we as a society or as a world have ended up. That acceptance entails also taking responsibility for how we got here. So that's an important first step. Acceptance and taking responsibility for choices we've made in the past that have gotten us to this place where we're not happy. The second step, once we've accepted where we are, is to envision where we want to be and who we want to be. This is a critical step, and it is really the step that this series is going to be focused on, envisioning our destination. And the third step, once we've recognized where we are and envision where we want to be, is to figure out how to plug the gap between this and that. It's very much like finding oneself in the middle of a terrain that is barren, that has no life, where there are no plants, no vegetation, no flowers, where it's just dusty, there's no water, the skies are, gloomy. And we decide this isn't really conducive to joy or well-being. The question then becomes, where do we want to go? It's important to identify that destination so that we can take the steps. This actually reminds me of a funny experience that my husband and I had when we got married, over 2 decades ago, and took our honeymoon in Italy, in Tuscany. We rented a car and we went from hilltown to hilltown. And I remember distinctly that we kept getting lost. And we kept getting lost because for some reason, our sense was that things weren't signposted very well. And in those days, the maps were hard to read. We didn't have all the fancy GPS systems that we have today. Anyway, we kept finding ourselves at these roundabouts, basically, I guess we call them circles in the United States, that said tutti direzioni, but with no indication as to which exit led where. And so we would often go round and round and round, and it was basically having to toss a coin to decide which of the exits we were going to take. And believe it or not, we'd often find ourselves circling back and ending up in the same place from which we had started. So that's not the best way to go on a journey and arrive at the kind of destination we want. We certainly don't want to find ourselves taking steps, but ending back exactly the same place we were, the place in which we were not so happy. So there's a quote that has inspired me to think about these topics and to think about the importance of envisioning in our lives. I want to share that quote with you. It is from Napoleon Hill. And it says, and I'll put it here at the bottom so you can see it, what the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. That is such a powerful statement. Everything we see in our world, all our accomplishments as individuals or as a human race, has started with the idea of a concept, a thought that something is possible, and then a belief that it's possible, because it's only when we believe that something is possible that we're willing to put energy into trying to make it happen. And this is the goal in this series, is for us to envision and to really believe that the things we're envisioning are possible, so that we can infuse ourselves with positive energy and the hope that's necessary to take the action, the requisite action, and take the choices that lead us to this new vision. However, it's not enough merely to envision the destination. There's another thing that I've been reflecting on a lot that I wanted to share with you, and that's the importance of aiming really high. So I was reminded of a poem that I read as a young, I think I was 12 or 13 years old, and it really stuck with me. So I went looking for it, because this poem has really shaped my thinking over the course of many years. It's by Robert Service, and I'm going to read it to you because it really conjures up the image of why aiming high is important. He articulates it really well. He says, "When I was daft, as urchins are, and full of fairy lore, I aimed an arrow at a star and hit the barnyard door. I've shot at heaps of stars since then, but always it's the same. A barnyard door has mocked me when Uranus was my aim. So I'll shoot starward as of yore, though wide my arrows fall. I'd rather hit a big barn door than never aim at all." This to me says it all. We aim for the stars and hopefully we'll hit at least the barnyard door. But if our aim is low, if we don't aim high, it's likely that our arrows will go into the dust and we won't achieve very much. So I want us to keep that in mind as we have our conversation today. And by the way, I'm going to leave time for questions at the end. If you have questions, wait till the end and then put question marks, if you will, please, in front of the questions so we can spot them and take them from there. Okay. So in that spirit of conceiving and believing that something's possible and aiming high, let's focus today on one aspect of where we are as a collective humanity and where we hope to be, where we envision we could be as an alternative. The best way I can think of conveying this is to share with you an analogy. It's not an analogy that I came up with. It actually was articulated by a wonderful Singaporean gentleman by the name of Kishore Mahbubani. He is a career diplomat, an academic, and actually was for a while the president of the United Nations Security Council. He served in that capacity a number of years ago. So this is what he says as he takes stock of where our world is. He says, humanity for a very long time consisted of 193 boats, kind of bobbing on the seas of international life. These boats really representing the nation states, so 193 of them. And he said for many years, our sole concern was to make sure that we regulated how these boats traveled so that they didn't get involved in collisions. However, things have changed today. We are no longer 193 boats. Thanks to advances in trade, finance, communications, technology, the world has become so interconnected and interdependent that we've essentially become like a ship with 193 cabins. He goes on to say that this ship, while the affairs of each cabin are very well regulated internally, unfortunately, the ship as a whole lacks both captain and crew, which means that when a big storm hits or the seas get turbulent, the ship is in tremendous danger of sinking. This is because what affects any one of us affects all. And what affects the ship as a whole affects all the cabins. Now, we know from recent experience, including the pandemic, that what happens in one part of the world affects all parts of the world. The virus always starts in one part of the world and then travels and affects the whole world. We have seen how supply chains have been affected. Going back even further, let's take the example of the troubles in Syria that have been going on for a number of years now. You know, for so long we thought the problems in Syria belong in Syria. It's their internal affair. They should take care of it. Little did we realize that the troubles in Syria would spawn a number of global crises, including a massive refugee crisis that would affect Europe so deeply, that would be instrumental and basically lead to the rise of populism in Europe, that would be one of the factors in Brexit, in the British wanting to leave the European Union because they wanted to control what they deemed was uncontrollable migration. We also didn't foresee that the territory of Syria and the surrounding areas would become such a haven for terrorism and the growth of ISIL. And a third thing that we didn't really anticipate was that the problems in Syria would lead to various countries in the world taking sides in what one of the newspaper articles a number of years ago described as a proto-world war, with countries arrayed on both sides. Climate change also demonstrates that we're interconnected. Pollution and carbon dioxide know no borders. So what we do in one part of the world affects human beings in all parts of the world. For me, one of the most glaring examples of how what happens in one place affects us all lies in this fact. Did you know that experts say that if India and Pakistan, both of which are nuclear powers, were to somehow accidentally or on purpose enter into a nuclear war, even if it were a limited nuclear war, limited in duration and limited in geography, it would essentially have the effect of causing massive crop failures for several years in a row, that in turn would put at risk 2 billion people in the world, expose them to the risk of starvation. That is an enormous effect. And that is just from one incident that might occur. So it's becoming clear that the biggest dangers facing humanity today are collective in nature. They're global. We've talked about some of them: climate change, the pandemic, the global economic recession, the threat of a nuclear war. These are all major global problems. Global problems, by definition, demand collective solutions. And yet, we are lacking precisely the decision-making and enforcement institutions that our world needs in order to effectively tackle these global problems. So, we were talking about envisioning, right? What the mind can conceive and believe it can achieve. We need to start envisioning a new system of administering the affairs of our planet that is based on the recognition that the interests of all nations are fused. We all have a common interest. And we need to let go of this habit that we have, this dysfunctional habit of acting as though we were each independent as nation states, that we were each still boats bobbing on the sea of international life, that our behavior didn't affect each other, and trying to engage in this futile, endless game of trying to achieve an equilibrium between the interests of various nations, which also entails a spirit of competition between nations. Now, I don't want to spend time today thinking about the step 3. Remember, we said accept where we are, envision where we need to be, and then how do we bridge the gap? Because the how do we bridge the gap will come, and we will explore some of the hows in future episodes of this series. But it's important to sit with the vision. What would it feel like if we truly were a global community and recognized and accepted that we were, and then acted as though we were? Because we are a global community, we are one, and yet we're pretending that we're not. What would it feel like? What would it look like? How might we act? It's only when we truly imbibe the feelings and have the vision and flesh it out that we will then be willing to and motivated to take the next steps. So if you would like to comment about what you think will happen in a world of the kind we've described, where we all recognize that we are one ship with 193 cabins, where we've decided that this destination and this understanding is really critical and can get us away from the immense suffering that we're going through these days, again, thanks to the pandemic and the global economic recession and climate change. It's not so much the disasters that are causing us to suffer, it is our unpreparedness and our inability to counter and tackle them effectively. Okay, if you have any questions, please feel free to post and put question marks in front of your questions, and then that way my eyes will go straight to the question marks, and I'd be happy to try and talk about try to field some of your questions, or all of you can jump in and we can have a little bit of a conversation. My aim with this program is to keep it short and sweet, so that we get basically our booster of hope and go away for the week inspired and hopeful. And please take these conversations and share them with your friends, your communities, your colleagues, and feel free. Somebody's asked here, will it be recorded? It is being recorded, and I will post, it'll also be available on the Facebook pages, both on my personal profile and at CPGG, Center for Peace and Global Governance, if you'd like to go to that page and follow it or like it. You will also see the recordings there, and I will post them also on CPGG's YouTube channel, so that you can share them with friends. So, I don't see any questions. I think you've all saw the note that for StreamYard, in order to be able to, if you want your identity to show, you need to go in and accept StreamYard's request. But otherwise, I will share with you one more thing that I'm actually really excited about. If you like the kinds of topics that we're going to be discussing in this series, you might be interested in my new book that is going to be available starting January 1st of 2021, so just in a few days. It's called The Alchemy of Peace. And it'll be out and available January 1st. It really discusses 6 essential shifts in mindsets and habits that are necessary for us to be able to achieve world peace. All right. Well, if it looks like there are no questions, in that case, I will bid you all a wonderful rest of your Saturday. Have a wonderful weekend. Keep up your positive energy, stay hopeful, and I hope you will join me again next Saturday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, same place, again on either on my personal Facebook page or on the CPGG Center for Peace and Global Governance page. Take care, and again, thank you for your time. Goodbye.